Hello, students. Welcome to class. Today we are at a very special location. I am coming to you from India via the magic of Zoom. This is behind me. This is the Mahabodhi Stupa. This is a very famous Buddhist pilgrimage site located in modern-day India. Buddhists from all over the world come and visit this place, believing that this is where the Buddha obtained his enlightenment. And we'll learn a little bit about what that word means in today's lecture. All right, and let's go ahead and we're going to look a little bit at a few slides here, but here we are. Okay, so we're going to first talk a little bit about the historical context, the historical world that an individual named Siddhartha Gautama, this is the name of the Buddha before he becomes enlightened, Siddhartha Gautama, was born into. We're not really sure the exact time periods, the exact time in which the individual who would become the Buddha came into this world. We think roughly between maybe the 8th to 6th century before Common Era, perhaps as perhaps as late as the 4th century before Common Era. He was born into a world where the dominant religion, some call it Hinduism. Often scholars refer to the dominant religion that the Buddha will encounter as Brahmanism. Brahmin is a word for priests. So it's a religion in which a priestly caste is at the center of everything. A religion governed by priests and their relationship to kings. These priests, one has to be born into this caste-based lineage of priests, and the priests are trained to manage sacrifices, such as animal sacrifices to different gods and goddesses. This period in history is very much a polytheistic universe, a world in which many, many different gods and goddesses are believed to inhabit, the universe and the Indian subcontinent. And the Brahmins could, in theory, make these gods and goddesses happy. So they'll do things for people, like bring rainfall or cure diseases. The Brahmins, the priests, remember the Brahmins are the priests, will make these gods and goddesses happy by reciting a very special set of holy scriptures called the Vedas, while making sacrifices such as animals, butter, sacred liquids, around a sacred fire. The form of government is a government in which religion and politics are one. So the king, the rulers will work closely with the Brahmins, and the idea of governments is very much tied to this idea that there should be these religious laws structuring governments. And you have a tension here. You have Brahmanism, but then you have another group, sometimes called the Shramanas, the wanderers. These are renouncer traditions. Renounce means to give something up, to forsake something. And what are the renouncers giving up? They're giving up the society. They're giving up the theocracy. And they're going off into the woods, into the forest, to seek some kind of higher spiritual good. And the main body of religious literature this time period is called the Vedas. And the Vedas, we consider roughly translated as holy scriptures, although the Vedas were not written down till much later. Throughout much of the history of the Vedas, these holy scriptures, thought to be the foundational scriptures of the religion of Hinduism, these scriptures are not written down till much later. So for much of the history, these are scriptures that are passed down orally via the Brahmins, this priestly caste. All right. The Vedas speak, and we read about this in the readings from the Rig Veda, the hymn to the cosmic person, of a great sacrifice before time began, a sacrifice in which all there is, was, and could ever be was one divine being. This divine being is called Purusha, the cosmic person. Purusha is sacrifice, and from this sacrifice, the world is born. So Purusha sacrifices itself and gives rise to the world, gives rise to animals, gives rise to different gods and goddesses, mountains and rivers and trees, and humans, and in particular, human society. So let's take a look a little bit at religion of the Vedas. Above all, this is a polytheistic universe. We have many gods and goddesses, often associated with nature. A very common god is the god Agni, the god of fire. You would also have gods of wind and thunder. For any of you who've studied Greek mythology, it's very similar. Sacrifice. The performance of sacrifices during special times of the year or special times of the month, this was seen of the highest importance, the paramount importance, and failure to conduct the sacrifice would bring down the anger, the rage of these gods. Again, everything comes out of this one primordial sacrifice, the sacrifice of the Purusha. And you don't need to note all the foreign terms, but from this sacrifice. So from this cosmic being, the mouth of the cosmic being that sacrifice becomes the Brahmins or the priests. The arms become the kings or the warriors. The legs become the Vaishyas or the merchants or commoners. And finally, the feet becomes the Shrudras, the servants. And it said that, according to the tradition, we have a hierarchy of purity, with the mouth being the purest. So the Brahmins or the priests are believed to be the most pure. And the Shudras, who come from the feet, which is considered the dirtiest part of the body, are the least pure. So we have very much a ranked hierarchy, of which many traditions, including Buddhism, would come over time to, at least in belief, reject. A very important term here is dharma. Dharma, we're going to see this term a lot throughout this semester. Dharma in this context means caste duty. So depending whether you're a Brahmin or a warrior or a merchant, you have a certain duty to perform. And that duty is, you're born with it and you must maintain it. And also, by maintaining society, you can keep these rituals going, which will keep society alive. So we have a theocracy, and let's take a look at what we have here. So we have a king, and we have the priests. The priests would do rituals for the king. The king would pay the priests to do so. The priests would advise the king on how to rule according to the religious principles of Brahmanism. Later on, someone called this Hinduism. So the priests are advising the kings are paying the priests, and this is how the government kind of functioned. A very important idea at this time was the ideal of becoming a Chakravartin. And what does that mean? A Chakravartin is a universal king whose duty it is to ethically rule over the universe. So we can think, if anyone's ever seen, like, the Game of Thrones and so forth, kingdoms tend to not want to shrink. They tend to not want to stay still. They tend to want to expand out. Kings want their power to grow, or queens want their power to grow. And that's very much the ideal, is to become this one great universal ruler. Okay, so that's some of the trends. Now, the 8th to 6th century becomes what some have called the beginning of an axial age. You don't have to worry too much about what that term means. The axial age is a period of great transformation from all over the world, where you'll get, figures like Socrates will emerge during the axial age, Lao Tzu in China, great thinkers who will challenge and question the old establishment, the old order. In this period, we have a group called the Renouncers. These are groups who aren't so much interested in the old theocracies, at least the way that theocracies were being managed. Many of these groups believed that to live in the kingdoms, to live in the cities, was to become corrupted, and they would leave society hoping by living either in groups or in isolation in the forest, they could focus on some kind of internal practice, some kind of meditation or yoga, to find, well, what's the purpose of life? How do you overcome suffering? How do you find everlasting happiness? The belief of many of these groups, who are the renouncers, is that you couldn't figure that out by staying in society. Society would kind of suck you in with its obligations, bills, responsibilities, taxes, family duties and obligations. All of these things take away from the pursuit of finding happiness within. Because when you're part of society, you want money so you can buy things like, a nice comfortable bed, or really delicious food, or a nice television, things that gratify our senses. And a common belief of the renouncer tradition is our senses, whether it's our sense of smell or our eyes, or our sense of sound, these direct our minds outwards, where real happiness, real pleasure real bliss is to be found within. Well, society kind of trains us to pursue the pleasures of the senses. And that's kind of a problem for the renouncers. And that's why they leave society and they go off into these forests. They go off into the forest, the woods, the caves, sometimes cremation grounds. And here's some common beliefs. Many of the groups that are giving up society believe that our world, our society is inherently suffering. That to live and exist in the world is to suffer. And so long as you're living and existing in the world, you're suffering. This is a term we're going to want to know. It's called samsara. This is cycles of birth, death, and reincarnation. This is a problem for people like the Buddha and the Jains and many of these traditions that are going out into the forest and renouncing the world. To be born is to die is to be reborn, and to reincarnate in this world is to suffer again and again and again and again and again. The driving force of samsara is karma. Based on our mental states, we engage in actions in this world. This will have a result and will condition what we'll experience in this life and in the next. And we'll discuss more about, karma is this idea of what goes around comes around. You reap what you sow. And we'll talk more about the mechanism of karma in next week's lecture. Meditation. And I've meant to put yoga here as well. Part of the belief is that if meditation here, and there's many, many, many types of meditation, but the two main ideals, the word is bhavana, it's mental cultivation. If you cultivate the powers of the human mind, there's a way to maybe overcome samsara, to overcome the problems of, to transcend karma and to end suffering. It's by cultivating the mind and withdrawing our senses from things out in the world that distract us. Like my coffee. I had to get my coffee. One more sip. That's good. No, it's not good. See, every morning I'm addicted to my coffee. I gotta get up and I gotta go and I get my coffee. And it's third time's a charm. Good. All right. So meditation, and meditation's aim is to control the senses, so that we're not craving coffee or craving, nice succulent foods or craving sexual pleasure. Meditation controls the mind. That's the ideal, by helping us overcome the power of the senses which constantly project us outward and constantly have us chasing things in this world. Through meditation, through control of the senses, also through ethical conduct, the renouncers believed a higher wisdom could be achieved. And wisdom here conquers ignorance. Ignorance, this darkness, this not knowing what the nature of reality is what keeps us bound in the suffering of existence, what keeps us being reborn again and again, and what keeps us, under the power of karma and the senses. The groups are looking to use this wisdom to find out, well, beyond the name that I was given when I was born, beyond the caste I was said I belong to, beyond my families and my house, really, who am I? Is all that I am just what society has told me I am, or is there something more to it? To find the answer of the question of the self from a mind that's been sharpened through meditation and has opened up this real power of wisdom, the renouncers believe that one could attain a state beyond this cycle of reincarnation. And this state is sometimes called moksha, sometimes called nirvana. We'll talk more about the different ideas and beliefs behind moksha and nirvana next week. Dharma, which in the context of society meant doing your caste duty, becomes reappropriated by these groups. The path to moksha and the path to nirvana, that now becomes dharma. Buddhism will be one of the groups that will promote this ideal as a wanderer tradition. It'll sometimes really look at the different renouncer traditions, and there's many of them. For example, we have the Jains, who believed in extreme non-violence. Some would even fast on to death, thinking that by fasting on to death, you're not eating stuff. By not eating stuff, you're not killing and harming any type of living being. You had some groups who would say, no, you should live it up and enjoy life. You had these hedonistic groups. Buddhism will portray itself as a middle way between the extreme asceticism, and this is a word meaning kind of to give things up, but on a with the hope of obtaining some higher spiritual state. You have the extreme asceticism versus extreme pleasure of the world. Buddhism will endeavor to create a system that's a middle way, and that middle way is the Noble Eightfold Path, which we're going to learn more about. But first, let's get to our character called the Buddha. And to talk about what we know about the Buddha really is to talk a lot about what we don't know. Because what we don't know is actually more than what we do know. Let's take a look. When we talk about Buddhism, and we talked about this in the first class, is this religious tradition that spread all over the world, predominantly located in Asia, but you find it in different, growing in all parts of the world, and you can even here in North America. We talked about the different, cultural differences that we find in Buddhism. We talked about some of the different sects like Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana. Uniting all Buddhists, and I'm going to say in general, I'm going to say in general, if there's anything that all Buddhists have in common, or most Buddhists, let's say most Buddhists, it's this idea of the three jewels. And a common prayer is, I take refuge in the Buddha. The Buddha is the first jewel. The Buddha here is the enlightened teacher. And the enlightened teacher will teach us the path to escape samsara, to obtain happiness and peace. And this path is called the Dharma. Now, the Buddha eventually will no longer be present. So you have, to keep the tradition alive, you have a group that I call the heirs of the Buddha. This is a community of monks and nuns. This community of monks and nuns we call the Sangha. And this is a very common prayer that you hear in Buddhism is, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha, the three jewels. All right, so let's start with the first of the three jewels, and we'll learn about, we're going to be looking at the concept of all the jewels throughout this semester. But the first jewel is the enlightened teacher, the Buddha. Again, the dates vary, but most stories, most accounts say that His career will begin somewhere in the northern area of the Indian subcontinent. And we have the names. In fact, he has many names, more than one name. One name is Shakyamuni, the sage of the Shakya. So this to learn a little bit about this is to talk about the historical period. Much of society was broken up into different clans, and the clan that the Buddha belonged to was the Shakya clan. So he's the sage of the clan he's born into. The name that this being that we're going to be talking about as the Buddha originally goes by is Siddhartha Gautama, sometimes pronounced Gautama, depending on. So when we talk about Buddhism, we have two different pronunciations. We have one pronunciation system based on Sanskrit, which is the one that I use. And then we have another one based on Pali. And so sometimes you might notice in your textbook, certain words are spelled differently in different textbooks. That's because some are drawing more on the Sanskrit pronunciation, some more the Pali. But Siddhartha Gautama, who eventually will undergo a name change. Why? Because he becomes the Buddha, the awakened one or enlightened one. So this is what the word Buddha means. Siddhartha, this individual who's born as Siddhartha Gautama, is not quite awake. And according to Buddhism, most of us are not awake, regardless of how much coffee we drink. Okay. Most of us are born ignorant of the nature of reality. Siddhartha Gautama was said to have been born close. He was what's called, and we'll learn more about this word, a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva it's like a blossoming flower, but rather it's a being that's blossoming into becoming a Buddha. So Siddhartha was in the process of blossoming, and when he fully blossomed and became enlightened or awakened, he was no longer Siddhartha. He was the Buddha, the awakened one. All right, so Siddhartha Gautama or Gautama, the sage of the Shakyas, and the Buddha. And he's the awakened one. But what is he awakened to? What does it mean to be awake? Well, he will become awakened to the causes of suffering and rebirth. Where most of us are asleep, not realizing in the power of karma and how it's taking us down the direction of suffering and rebirth, Siddhartha, when he becomes the awakened one, he will realize this. The nature of reality. He understands how things truly exist. Whereas most of us, we only see this world through the lens of our desires, our aspirations, our egos. The Buddha will become awakened to the nature of reality. Nirvana. Nirvana means to blow out or to extinguish. Here, the Buddha is awakened to the path that blows out and extinguishes karma and the causes that perpetuate us or force us to be reborn in samsara. All right, the early life stories of the Buddha are largely based on oral tradition. And I'm putting a little bit late the historical Buddha at the 6th century before Common Era. Could be 4th century before Common Era, maybe a little bit earlier. but we don't get any texts about the life of the Buddha, any actual stories about the life of the Buddha until around the 1st century. So what does that tell us? That tells us we have a very long period of time, perhaps 5, 6 centuries, half a millennia, from the time that this individual was in the world till we actually start to see written stories or accounts. And there's no one text. There's no one book that every last Buddhist in the world will turn to as the definitive life story of the Buddha. And what we don't know. So we don't know the exact dates. We don't know the exact life story. And we're not sure what he looked like either. Well, that's because we don't get we do have descriptions in the text of what he looked like, but we don't see artistic images of the Buddha till several centuries after, his purported life. Okay, and this is something I want us to know, is that the stories of the Buddha, I'm not saying story, but a plural. Stories of the Buddha will reflect different cultures, different traditions, different values, and different historical time periods. Also, we discussed, for example, how we have Mahayana Buddhism in places like China and Japan. Their stories of the Buddha are often a little bit different than the stories of the Buddha found in the Theravada traditions, the traditions of Cambodia and Thailand. So there's many, many different accounts, many different versions, many different presentations now. You have films, you have comic books, and you have cartoons. So what I want to do to introduce you to the life of the Buddha is we're going to look at one presentation of the Buddha, and this presentation of the Buddha is in animated form. I'm going to put the subtitles in the animation, but sometimes the subtitles don't correspond with foreign terms. So I'm going to make sure I'm sharing this correctly here. Share screen, share computer sound with the screen. And I'm going to optimize screen sharing for the video clip. Here we go.
Where's Ananda?
He's in the shed, crying. He thinks you're going to die.
Go and get him. Oh, I'm tired, Kesagutami. My body feels like an old cart held together with straps. Ananda, all of us, sooner or later, have to leave what we love. But, Master, I am not ready for you to die. You don't need me. I've told you all I can. And what I've told you is like the ocean. The further you go in, the deeper it gets. But I can hardly swim yet. Then let's start together at the shore. When we die, we are reborn. Our good actions in one life are rewarded in the next. When I was reborn into this life, my father, King Suddhodana, had the highest hopes for me.
Wise Asita, is Prince Gautama destined for greatness?
This child has all the signs of a great being. He has lived many lives, each more noble and truthful than the last. He will become either a great ruler or a teacher of great truths.
What will decide it?
He will decide.
I want him to be a great king like me. And I think he will have no need to leave this palace.
My father created a perfect world for me for over 20 years.
The prince will take his walk along this path today. Make sure there are no dead flowers, Your Highness.
The prince's horse is lame, Your Highness.
Then stable him elsewhere until he recovers. This is something the prince need not know about.
My father gave me everything I could possibly desire. I had no need to ask for anything, but there were some things that even my father couldn't control.
Prepare the horses. I'd like to take a ride. In all these years, Channa, I've never gone beyond that wall. Who has painted his hair white? Why does he move so slowly? Is it a dance?
He is old.
What is old?
It happens to all of us in time. The skin dries, the hair loses its color, and the body becomes weak. That is old.
It happens to all of us? I don't like his singing.
He's not singing. He is sick and in pain.
What is sick?
His body is complaining. All bodies, rich or poor, ignorant or wise, can feel this way.
All bodies can feel this way? How can he sleep with all that noise around him?
This is a dead man. He is not asleep. His life has gone.
Is this the only dead man in the world?
I'm afraid not, my prince. Death comes to every living thing.
Take me back, Channa.
My son, I've got wonderful news for you.
Why didn't you tell me about life outside?
I wanted the palace to be your life always. I wanted you to be happy.
And I was. But now I can't ever be happy again.
Of course you can.
Knowing that you, my dear father, will die. That my wife may get sick. That Channa and I will grow old and weak.
This is not the time to think about death. I have wonderful news. You have a son.
I have a son.
He was beautiful. And of course I wanted to be glad, but now I knew that he too would have to suffer sickness, old age, and finally death.
What are you?
A seeker.
Of what?
of the only thing in life that doesn't wither and die.
And what is that?
Truth.
And have you found it?
Not yet. But since leaving home and giving everything away, I felt more at peace.
I'm not free to leave the palace. I have a duty to my father's kingdom.
But if you seek and find the truth, your kingdom will be infinitely greater.
I decided to leave that night. And like you, Ananda, I cried. It is painful to be separated from those you love. But I knew that when I had found what I was looking for, I would return to share it with them. Channa took me to the forest, and I exchanged my palace clothes for simple ones. I cut my hair, and then told Channa to tell my father that from now on, I would live without a home, in search of perfect peace of mind. I spent a year with 2 elderly masters of meditation. They helped me to calm and train my mind. But I knew I hadn't found what I was looking for. I moved on. I met 5 other men, all about my age. They too were searching.
I have studied meditation with 2 masters, but we sat in the shade.
Pushing our bodies to the limits gives us spiritual energy.
When you deny your body what it most wants, you set your mind free for higher things. I desire comfort and warmth, and he loves to talk.
I desire sleep.
What do you desire most?
I always seem to be hungry.
Well then, you know what you must do without.
I starved myself for 6 years. By the end, I was eating 3 sesame seeds a day. And yet, the only thing that I could be certain about was that I was close to death. As I prepared to die, I thought of my son and remembered a moment when I was about his age, the meaning of which I suddenly understood. It was the palace ploughing match. Everyone else was watching a festival, but I was seeing something different. Sweating men and animals, blind milk-white grubs being exposed to the sun, cutworms and insects. Everyone else was enjoying themselves, but I saw just suffering and death. I sat there for a long time, feeling very still. Only in that stillness could I see how things really were. This memory filled me with energy. If I had already felt something of the peace I was seeking when just a child, well-fed and clothed, then I certainly did not need to starve myself to find it again. I decided to eat properly once more. Much to the disgust of my companions.
I shall not get up from here until I found the truth I'm seeking. That special awareness, enlightenment.
But the mind has a terrible enemy. His name is Mara, and he seeks to tempt and destroy. First, he sent his beautiful daughters.
Tempt him. Distract him. Make him desire you.
Mara knew that if I found enlightenment, I would go on to tell others how to escape his evil power. I had to find that moment of stillness again.
So, you ignore my daughters. Well, you shall feel the fury of my army. by your worst nightmare, Gautama! Do you think you are ready for supreme enlightenment? Gautama, are you so sure you have it in you? Supreme enlightenment. Gautama, are you worthy enough?
But as I touched the earth spoke.
He is worthy.
And I saw my hundreds of past lives. And I saw how what I had done in one life influenced the next. I saw life as a wheel. For some, always moving upwards. For others, always falling downwards. There was no escape from the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. And no escape from the three poisons, hate, greed, and stupidity that kept the wheel turning. I realized that whether your life is easy or hard, you can't escape death. But suddenly, what I'd been searching for was revealed to me. If I did not fear death, death had no power. Watching the moon that long night, I slowly understood that the way to avoid suffering was to free yourself from wanting anyone or anything, and to be ready always to give and receive. Found enlightenment. I had become a Buddha, an awoken one.
All right, so that's just one account. To sum up some of the main elements, you have a prince who's born into a very great royal empire. And the prince will either become a great king, a Chakravartin, the term we learned, this universal emperor, or they'll go on to become a renouncer. And the father does not want that to happen. The father wants an heir. Let's take a look at some of the elements of the story. Okay. So a variety of things we can say about the Buddha is often situated around certain key places, places that he lived. So the major sites of the Buddha is he's born in Lumbini. He obtains his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. He gives his first teachings in a place called Sarnath, and he'll die in Kushinagar. What I want to do is show you just a little bit of these places as they're practiced. Some Buddhists are visiting these places and practices are taking place. These are the 4 great sites of the Buddha, or associated with the Buddha. Sorry, a few technical difficulties here. Sure again. Here we are. Right, so those were some of the sites associated with the birth, the enlightenment, the first teachings given by the Buddha, and finally the Buddha passing into the state of nirvana, beyond death. I just want to show you a few more slides, and the lecture is running a little bit long. All right, and I'll just kind of give you a brief little go through some of these slides. So he's born in a place called Lumbini in modern-day Nepal, and the birth is quite miraculous. This is his mother. His mother is Mahamaya, the mother of the Buddha. In some stories, this woman is born again and again in the world whenever there is to be a Buddha, and she's the mother of all Buddhas in some stories. Here we can see the gods of Brahmanism, the gods of Hinduism rejoicing in the birth of the Buddha. And the Buddha, it comes out of the side of his mother and is said to, not have any of the birth fluids associated with, being born on his body. He's born pure. And in some stories that we read about, two giant streams of water come down from the heavens, one warm, one cold, to clean both the mother and the Buddha at the birth. The Buddha in some stories, he at this point, he's Siddhartha. He has not become the Buddha quite yet. He hasn't become the awakened one yet. Siddhartha walks on the lotus flowers and proclaims it'll be his last birth. After the birth of Siddhartha, his mother will die relatively soon after, and his aunt, Prajapati or Mahaprajapati, who will also become the first Buddhist nun, cares for the young child. The father is King Shuddhodana, and this is Shuddhodana holding his son Siddhartha, and this is a wise sage. And very common when a child is born in Asian cultures, an astrologer will be consulted to ask about any potential obstacles or opportunities. This wise sage says, if Siddhartha never sees old age, never sees sickness, never sees death, he will become a royal heir to the throne, will become a Chakravartin and a great king and a great ruler. However, if he sees any of those three sites, he'll then go on to become a great spiritual teacher. And his father, Shuddhodana, is like, well, I want an heir. I want my son to stay in the kingdom. I'm going to create a 24/7 pleasure palace for him for his whole life. So he lived it up. He was born to this royal lineage. He had, great food. He had entertainment. He had a palace for each of the different seasons. He, as a warrior, is trained in the warrior arts. He's surrounded in some stories by a large harem, a large group of very beautiful women who are there to please him in any way that he desires. And the idea of the father, by giving the son all of this, by spoiling the son, by indulging the son will never want to leave. So it's kind of like, think about a place you would want to live with servants, surrounded by great chefs and great cooks, and given all of your desires 24/7 on demand. That was the life of young Siddhartha. The stories will portray him as a great warrior who will fulfill his duty as per, the codes of the priests, the Brahmins. And like any warrior, like any priest, he'll eventually marry. And his wife's name is Yashodhara. Yashodhara and the Prince Gautama, they'll marry. And then, first comes love, then comes marriage. And then what comes next, he does have a son. He has a son named Rahula, who he'll eventually leave behind. But Rahula will reunite with the father later and become one of the monks in the Buddhist order. Well, at some point he gets kind of bored being in the palace. He gets kind of curious, you kind of want to know what else is out there. He wanders out. The first time he wanders out, he'll see an old person for the first time. And he has no idea what oldness is, what it means to get old. He's like, whoa, what is that? he sees a sick person. He's never seen a sick person before. He's like, whoa, what? Then he sees a dead person. And he's like, what is all of this? And his chariot driver, Channa, will tell him what these things are. And he goes, okay, but this only happens to these three people, right? And his chariot driver's like, no, actually, Prince, this is going to happen to you. And he's like, what? Is it going to happen to my son? Is it going to happen to my father? Is it going to happen to my wife? And the chariot driver's like, yes. And this bothers him. And he's like, what is the point of all of this? Me sitting here and indulging in these pleasures if this is what's going to happen? He goes out one more time and he's confronted with the image of something that does make him feel better in his state of, stress and grief and tension. He sees the image of a shramana. A shramana means a wanderer. He sees the image of a holy person. And in this image, he thinks, this is how I can maybe overcome old age, sickness, and death. So he decides to leave the palace. This is Kantaka, his horse, and there's many stories about this horse. This horse was born the same time as Siddhartha, destined to serve him. You can see the gods are holding up the horse because he's kind of sneaking out of the palace. If the horse makes any sound, then the king, his wife, his family, they'll all rush out to try to stop him. And he goes to where you go, and during the pandemic, many of us are going out into the forest. It's a place maybe of safety, away from disease, to reconnect with who we are, to find a sense of peace and balance. So he goes off into forest life. He'll meditate for 6 years with different meditation masters, and he'll master their techniques of meditation and achieve very, 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 very advanced states of mental focus, of mental clarity from these masters. But he'll realize their systems of meditation, they don't really lead to the cessation of birth, death, and old age. So he goes on. He meets a group of ascetics. These are individuals who believe that by denying and punishing the body, you deny and punish the senses, which again make us chase after things in the world. And he decides, okay, maybe this is the pathway. So he'll starve himself. He'll eat at one point a single grain of rice. He will hold his breath for long periods of time, that believing that if you sacrifice the breath, maybe this is a way to overcome old age, sickness, and death. He'll come close to states of passing out. But he comes to realize, I'm going to die here. I'm not going to actually realize what I'm hoping to. So he eats a little bit, and then he starts to realize there's got to be a middle way. There has to be some kind of middle way between the indulgences of the forest, the indulgences of the palace, and this extreme austerity, this extreme giving up of everything that the ascetics are doing. He meditates under a Bodhi tree, and it's here that he confronts a demon. And we can think of many stories of religious figures, whether it's Jesus going out into the desert, so religious figures encountering some kind of temptation. So Mara tells him, now some Buddhists believe this is an actual demon, some say this is just part of our own mental ignorance. Mara says, you're a bad king. You need to get up and go back to the palace. Siddhartha doesn't flinch. Mara says, okay, I'm going to send my beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous daughters to seduce you. Mara doesn't flinch. Mara then sends an army of ghouls and ghosts, and Siddhartha doesn't flinch. They shoot arrows at the prince, which right as they're about to strike, turn into beautiful flower petals that fall at his feet. And then in one of the most iconic gestures, the Buddha will touch the earth. Because Mara says, who can prove, who's here even to tell that you're enlightened? Buddha touches the earth. And when he touches the earth trembles as in a way to bear witness. And this is special mudra, special hand gesture that you'll often see in images. The earth trembles and bears witness to the fact that he is now an enlightened being. And then Mara runs away. Siddhartha is no longer Siddhartha. He is the awakened one, the Buddha. So he obtains enlightenment, and this is in Bodh Gaya. Now, what does it mean? This will be kind of where we're going to end today, and we're going to elaborate on these points in the subsequent lectures. The Buddha is the awakened one, and the Buddha is awakened to three things that the rest of us are asleep to. This takes place in 3 watches of the moon. I'm borrowing here language from John Strong, an author of Buddhism, who calls these 3 watches, these 3 phases of the moon. In the first phase of the moon, the Buddha will see all of his past lives, all the things that he did that would enable him to be born as Siddhartha, and as Siddhartha move forward to become a Buddha. The second watch of the moon, the Buddha at this point will become awakened to samsara. How and why are beings born perpetually again and again into states of suffering? The third and final watch of the moon, he sees the pathway out of suffering, this path to overcoming suffering, which is called the Dharma. All right, so we're going to stop here at this phase of his career. Next lecture, we're going to look more at some of his teachings and what exactly did he experience under these 3 different watches of the moon. All right, so we will see you next week. So please stay safe, stay well, and stay tuned.